morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome back to another video. Thank you for coming back. If you're joining me for the first time, which I'm hoping you're not because you have a few things to catch up on, but welcome anyway. Thank you for clicking to watch this video. I'm guessing you want to kind of figure out how to study for the GDL exams, which is what this video is about. This video is the fourth installment of my Path to Becoming a UK Barrister series. So if you haven't caught the first couple of videos, there's quite a few of them, I would advise you to just pause this video, open another tab, or you can click out of this one completely if you want to, and just start from the beginning of the series. I've covered so far the GDL versus the LLB, GDL providers and applications. I've also covered tuition, and I've also covered the visa processes for non-EU international students. So I think you should probably catch up on that information before you jump into this. But if you are already taking the GDL, or by the time this video comes out, most GDL courses should have been completed. But if for any reason you have a resit or something of that nature, then this video will probably be helpful, and you don't need all of that because you've already probably gone through all of that. So if you just need a trick or some advice on how to study the GDL, this video is the one for you. It's not a trick, it's not so much a magic trick that you can just pull out. It's a lot of hard work and commitment, so I shouldn't have said that. But welcome to this video. In this video, we will just basically be talking about two main things: studying, how to study and ace the GDL exams, and how to gain, or the avenues for gaining legal experience while you're studying the GDL. So in the second installment for the series, I did talk about the modules and the course structure and content of the GDL. So just a quick recap, you have the GDL structure, which is 7 core modules, a few modules here and there that your provider might need you to cover or feel like you need to cover. The two main ones that most providers always cover are Introduction to Ethics and the English legal system. You will have coursework over the course of the year, 8-9 months mainly, and that's pretty much it. If you want more in-depth detail on the structure, please do go back to those videos. But that is pretty much it. Now, how do we get through these exams? First of all, I'm going to talk about the grading brackets. So there are 3 grading brackets for the diploma. It's distinction, commendation, and pass. You need to check your syllabi just to make sure that you have the correct percentages for each grading bracket. But what I remember was distinctions were about 70% and above, commendations 60% and above, so 60 to 69, and for the pass it's 40% and above. But just check, make sure that you have you know for yourself what they are, so you know what you're shooting towards. Over the course of the year, you do have coursework that helps you kind of figure out where you're falling in terms of those grading brackets. So there'll be a good guide in to help you know what kind of topics you need to be focusing on more, how you need to be answering questions better, what the structure of your answers should be for these essay-based questions. And that's pretty much all you need to know about the grading brackets. But all of that information will be in your program guide and in the course modules book, the course book for each module. It will be, all of that information will be in there. So make sure to read that and have that kind of sunk in your head. Now for the questions. So the GDL exams are all essay-based questions. So you're answering essay-based questions. None of them are really problem solving in any particular way. You're not being asked any trick questions, except for a few modules which I will talk about that are tricky. But you're not being asked anything. You're not being asked to crack a case or anything like that. They're purely essay-based questions covering all the topics that you would have learned over the course of the 8-9 months of learning, and that's that. The structure of the exam is that you will be answering 4 questions out of anywhere between 8 and 11 questions. 11 questions tends to be on the public law exams. They just tend to have a lot more questions in my experience, but the minimum number of questions you should have are about 8. So that means if you're answering 4 questions out of potentially 8 to 11 questions, you must know 4 topics off of the back of your head. You must be able to rattle those cases off for any topic when you're waking up from deep sleep. That's how ingrained the topics, their cases, the case law, the judgments, the relevant statutes, and what the common law says about this particular areas. All of that information needs to be settled and digested. Now, you obviously cannot also just know 4 topics. You are covering at least anywhere between a minimum of 20 to 24 topics per module over the course of the year. So you have a range of topics to pick from that you want to learn. Now, each module will deliver the topics as they see fit, as they feel is coherent, and you are free to kind of pick which topics you're leaning towards versus the ones that you're not. Now, I'm going to go into the structure of how I think you should study and how studying in that particular way is actually going to help you do very well in the exam. First things first is you need to figure out what your learning style is for the entire GDL program and for your entire career, honestly. How you are going to assimilate large pieces of information and how you are going to relay that kind of information to, obviously, if you're thinking of taking the bar program or becoming a barrister, then you're going to be speaking to clients and interacting with clients at some point. So you want to start to choose for yourself a learning style that is long lasting and that you can assimilate large amounts of information quickly, that you are able to pick out important details quickly, and that you're able to communicate in lay terms what the law is actually saying and what your argument is. So what I found that while I was doing the GDL is that I needed to approach learning law and understanding law and consuming law in a completely different way than I'd ever learned before. What that means is that your normal learning style, that which you're used to, that which usually works for you, might not. It might end up working fine, but you need to start thinking about what learning methods you're actually going to use during the GDL. What kind of learner you are. Are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learner? What works for you? I'm more of a visual learner. For some subjects other than as opposed to others. So I work, let's say for me, for example, I love mind maps, but I found that the whole point of mind maps is to minimize and make information concise, so you can just kind of look at a page and then take it all in. I love using colors, so learning with colors helps me to remember more easily and digest information more easily. However, with the GDL and with each module, there's so much information that I found it quite challenging to minimize and put into mind maps on paper. So that was an entire challenge for me. So with certain modules that I found that I could do that with, I did that. I used that method. I used the mind map approach for those and flowcharts for those. And for those that I couldn't, I used tables. I used just normal notebooks, bullet points, and I used a lot of auditory learning. So for some of the lectures that were recorded, I would have to go back and listen. And if you want to record lectures, you obviously have to ask permission because that is the professor's intellectual property. So for the ones that I could, I would go back and have to listen to them and make my notes. And so yeah, I was using 2 or 3 different learning styles depending on which module each style best worked for. So I found that I really wasn't learning the same way that I had been learning before. It was just a different approach. With my undergrad, I was finding that I was doing a lot more critical analysis and giving a lot more of my own opinions and a lot of my work and in the way I would write my notes. Whereas with the GDL, at least at that beginning stage, you're not really being asked your opinion about anything. You're not being asked to critically analyze any piece of information or anything that you're learning, but you are being asked to apply critical legal thinking skills. So assimilating information, being able to pick out detail, making precise notes, leaving irrelevant information out of your mind, and again, just memorizing. Memorization is a big part of the GDL, because there's so many cases, there's so many statutes, there's so many judgments to remember, all of which are of great importance. So memorization is the biggest thing. So you need to kind of figure out if your current learning style actually works for memorizing and assimilating a lot of information in a short period of time, and being able to actually accurately regurgitate that information. One thing that I found that was helpful was actually speaking to friends and family that are not in law, and trying to bounce, not even bounce, actually, just trying to relay and regurgitate what I've been learning. So let's say, for example, with mortgages, I would try to explain that entire area of law to a friend, and if the friend understood what I was saying or had like a fair idea of where I was going or what the area of law actually contains and consists of, I would know that I had understood and assimilated that information effectively, because I've been able to explain to a layperson what that concept is and what that area of law is. So it's a good way for you to learn. I would say, again, use lay people, because if you're obviously bounce and talk to friends and learn together, it's easier to learn from someone who is in the exact same situation as you, but it's easier to test the level of your knowledge acquisition with someone who is not in that area at all. So yeah, that's it on learning style. That's number one. Check your learning style and make sure that you adjust it to accommodate the way that you're learning now. The second thing you need to do is be prepared for all your tutorials. Now, this is a note to self, because it definitely would have made a difference for some topics had I been more prepared for my tutorials. But in the long run, all of the work that you do for the tutorials will pay itself back when it comes to exam season, because if you do, and if you are prepared for, even if it's 80% or 90% of your tutorials, that means you have actually done the required readings for all of those topics, and you've actually engaged and answered the questions for the tutorial. So what my tutorials look like, they were scheduled in advance. We have a set of questions and all the required readings. Once you've done the required readings, answer the set of questions. They cover the topic. Each question challenges your understanding of the topic and requires you to actually apply the case law and the articles that you're given to read, and the text, all the text from the textbook. So if you prepare for each tutorial, you go to the tutorial having done your readings, having questions prepared, knowing exactly what your gaps in the knowledge that you're supposed to be acquiring are, and you're able to ask questions to your professors in those tutorials, and then kind of cover those areas that you're not too sure of. And you've already done the readings before you get to the end of the year, so you're not having to actually go over required readings. If anything, it places you at an advantage when lectures end and you have time to prepare for the exam, because now you have time to actually even add supplementary reading to that which you've already done, and that can also gain you bonus points in the exam. So when you're answering questions, if let's say you used articles that you found yourself, if you used cases that were not even in the case list, but you've been able to add and assimilate that information on your own because you had more time to actually just learn a bit more and gather a bit more information than that which was already given to you, which is a lot. So it would be impressive for the examiners when you're answering questions, if you're able to pull on all of the foundational and core cases, core statutes, core articles, and also have supplementary materials in your answers. It would be fantastic. So make sure that you're preparing for all of your tutorials as much as you can and during the required readings. And this will help you with one of the other tips I'll mention just in a second. But being prepared for your tutorials will set you up very well for the exams. Thirdly, take the coursework seriously and do the mock exams when they come up. So mock exams sometimes are optional. Make sure you do them. It will be the first set of questions or first time allotted in the course for you to actually try to sit the exam under exam conditions. So you'll be given the mock exams. You're advised to time yourself, answer the questions, and see what it feels like. It also gives you a chance to practice the method of assessment that you want to use. So prior to the pandemic, there were the options. You had two options, either to write your exam or type your exam. All of them seated under exam conditions in a room. So either you're going to be in a computer lab or in a normal classroom writing or typing your exam. So doing the mocks, if you choose to write or type, gives you a fair idea of which method works better for you, because you can test out both of them. You can test out writing for one exam and you can test out typing for another exam. Now, given the current situation and how learning is being changed, I cannot tell you just as much as you can't tell me if exams will be conducted under normal sitting room conditions, or they will be conducted from home for a long time as they are being now. The current students are having to do their exams from home, online, under time conditions, but we don't know what the case will be. If it remains the case that people will be doing exams from home, then chances are it will just be typing. There will be no option to write. And so if typing isn't something, again, I think I mentioned this in the previous video, if typing isn't something that you are used to, that's something you need to be practicing. And so practicing that over the course of the year and when you get the mock exams is fantastic. So do the mock, make sure that you do the mock exams. And my final thing is have a plan for the exams from the beginning. So now you know that we have at least 20 to 24 topics per module. You know that in the exam you will have 8 to 11 questions and you will only be required to answer 4 of those questions. Again, if this has changed, you will be informed at the beginning of your course, at the beginning of the GDL, so you should know how to adjust what I'm about to tell you. But one thing that comes in handy is making case summaries as you go along for each topic and per module. So at the beginning of the year in September till March, usually, you are going to be covering all of those 20 to 24 topics. What you can do is make case summaries for the topics that you like. So if you're being required to answer 4 questions out of 8 to 11, you can obviously not know only 4 topics. My advice is to know anywhere between 6 to 8 topics per module, with the exception of contract and land law. So knowing 6 to 8 topics per module, if you know more than 8 topics off of the top of your head, you have all of that, all the cases, again, statutes, everything memorized, then you are good to go. But 6 to 8 topics is a good amount to shoot for. So over the course of the year, as you go through your classes, as you go through topics, note down the topics that you actually find interesting. Note down the topics that draw you in, that you have an affinity for, that you just love, and make case summaries for those topics. So for me, for example, let's say with EU law, I really liked free movement of goods more than I liked free movement of people. So I had case summaries for those lined up. EU supremacy was one topic that I really liked. I was doing my case summaries for those. In land law, leasehold, mortgages, did my case summaries for those. In equity and trust, I really liked wills for some reason, so I had case summaries for those. So I picked the topics that I like. With tort law, I really liked all of those topics, but what I found was with some of the, because it's an 8-month, 9-month course, obviously you don't get all the topics at once. You're not learning all of them at once, you're learning them over time. But with each term, I would say at least try and have 5 topics from each term, because some of the more interesting topics will come towards the end of the GDL, and that's what I found with tort law as I went along. Nuisance and trespass, all of that came towards the end, and by that time you're kind of actually worn out and beat. So try to make sure that you're managing your time well, and I will talk about that in another video, but make sure you're managing your time and energy well, so that you are strong through the entire course. So when the more interesting topics come, you're not already worn out and you haven't already chosen, let's say, your 8 topics, and you're just you've clocked out and you're done. You don't want to actually learn any more information. Make sure that that's not the case. Make sure that you're being balanced, but be picking the topics that you find interesting over the course and making case summaries for those. So with tort, first term, at least have 4 topics and all of their cases. So let's say there's 4 topics and there's God knows how many cases per topic. Make sure that you're highlighting the ones that you have been told are the primary cases or core cases for this area. Make sure that you have all of the relevant statutes for those, all of the relevant articles, and what the common law says about that. All of those things in a table. How I structured my case summaries were usually, let's say, the case name, the topic, the case name, parties, the topic, the judgment, the relevance of the judgment at this time, subsequent cases, and I would note whether it was precedents or not. So I had tables, and I would just fill in that information per topic, per case, and I would have that nicely laid out. So I had that nicely laid out by the time the exams came around. I mentioned before that I'm a visual learner, so one way that I found was easy for me to be able to memorize cases was to add images to my table. So let's say for let's say carbolic smoke, for example, which is in contract law, there was actually a newspaper article image that is attached to that case. So I just put that in there, and that helped me remember the case. That helped me remember the case. With EU law, that was even easier, because let's say if the topics were about Sabina, I think, had to do with an airline, so I just put a plane in there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but just picking elements of the case that you can use as images to help you remember is a really helpful way to memorize the cases, which is what I did. So compiling your case summaries for each topic from the very beginning, by the time you get to the end of the GDL, you have all your case summaries done. All you have to do is, if you need to still read articles, if you need to go back to your textbook, if you want to add supplementary information, you can add that. It's all nice and laid out for you. If, of course, you don't get your 8 topics before the end of the official year, and you need to go back, you still have some topics already covered, and then you can go back and just look at everything and pick which topics you like, and then do that in the 2 months that you have before the exam, and just cover that. And that way, just like that, you have 6 to 8 topics ready to go over, ready to revisit before the exams come. It's simple. It's simple in theory. It is a lot of work. It requires a lot of reading, because you have to do a lot of reading before you can simplify that information into case summaries. But trust me, you will be thankful for all of the work you put in over the course of the year when you get to the end and you're not scrambling to cover a multitude of topics just before the exams. So I briefly stated before that picking 6 to 8 topics works, except for land law and contract. Now, this is a very personal opinion, so feel free to disagree. It might work for you still picking 6 to 8 topics, but I would not advise. Those are the only 2 modules out of all of the 7 that I would say, and you're not going to like this, you should actually learn every topic inside out. If there is 24 for both of them, I would advise that you have covered all of those 24 topics. Well, yeah. There's no other way to say it. Make sure that you know all of those topics, because the topics are intertwined. for both modules, all of the topics are exactly what you see my hands doing. They are inseparable in a way that the other modules are not. So again, with equity and trust, wills, testaments, all of those things, trust you can separate from equity. In EU law, you can separate EU supremacy from free movement of goods. Those are very separate topics. You can cover some of like the cases, you can intertwine them into the way you answer questions, but they're very separate topics. You actually don't need to overlap. If you decide that you want to pick just those two topics, or you want to pick one of those two and then go with another set of topics, you are fine. With land law and contract law, that is just not the case. Offer and acceptance is going to be everywhere in every question that you answer regardless. With land law, what I find is, or at least what I found were with my questions, my set of questions in my mock exams and my coursework and in the final exams, is that the questions are very tricky. So the question on the face of it will ask you about one thing, or look like it's asking you about one thing, but the answer you're actually meant to give covers an entirely different set of topics. So a question that might look like it's about trespass might actually be a question about mortgages or something. Like, that's a ridiculous analogy to use, but in practicing, that's why you need to do the mock exams. You need to be able to catch the traps in the questions out, and there are a lot of traps in contract module questions and land law module questions. So because of how intertwined the topics are, I would say cover as much breadth and width as you can with those two modules, please. But with the others, it's much easier to kind of go picking your topics. With contract law and land law, you're going to have a long table of case summaries for sure. So that's really it for acing and studying. I don't have anything else to tell you about that. It seems really simple, and it's simple because, again, in theory it's simple, but actually getting through the work is where the challenge is going to be. So doing the readings, keeping up with the readings weekly or bi-weekly if you have tutorials bi-weekly. Lectures were every week for me, and tutorials were bi-weekly. So it's keeping up with the information while balancing everything else out. That is the challenge. And if you're able to go through all of your readings, go through required readings, do those case summaries, practice the mock exams, be prepared for your tutorials. And one more thing, speak to your professors. They are a resource for you. Tap into them. You have paid to do the GDL. They are being paid to teach you and help you ace the GDL. So go to them in their office hours, go to your personal tutors, suck the life out of them, suck the knowledge out of them. And the best part is they are willing to give you that knowledge. They're not going to baby you through the course. They're not going to follow up on you and chase you to do the work or give you the information. But once you approach them, honestly, lawyers love to talk. If there's anything that we know about lawyers, is that they love to talk. So please let them talk to you. Let them give you they are in overflow, just waiting to tell you everything they know and everything that they've learned. So use your professors, use your tutors as the resource that they are, and just get all of the information out, get all of your questions answered, get all of your gaps covered. And yeah, those are the, I think, 5 main things I mentioned to help you just get through and study the GDL. Now to resources that you can use while you're studying. In the first set of videos for this series, I have in the description box, so if you just go back, some text that simplifies certain areas of law. So I have recommendations for contract, public law, criminal, and the English legal system. So you are given your set of textbooks when you start the GDL, right? But if you find that certain textbooks are not working for you, please go out of your way to find the ones that do. The law libraries are full of multitudes of the same information by different authors. So feel free to use something that works for you. One resource that I found helpful aside, so libraries extra books, simplified authors, simplified content by different authors than those that I was already reading. Finding even newer editions could be helpful as well. I found that YouTube was quite helpful for some topics and for some areas of law. Just if you're ever just done and you don't want to read, you'd rather listen to someone explain, or you just want a different view on a concept to see if you understand it, just type a topic into the search box in YouTube and just go through what comes up. I found that those were quite helpful for me. I shared that with a lot of friends, and every time we would find that information, we would share that with each other. So YouTube, libraries, online resources. You will get grilled about LexisNexis and Westlaw. Every law student in the UK knows those two institutions. You will absolutely have to. So use LexisNexis and use Westlaw. It's tempting to use other resources that have even further simplified the information and have everything in one place. But I would advise that you use the case summaries and the case, all the case analysis as well, available on Westlaw and LexisNexis, because it really does prep you and train you into how you should be writing as a legal practitioner. Those summaries and case analysis are exactly how you should be writing. They're a template for how you should be answering questions, and so get used to using those summaries and those analysis instead of others, because that's what's actually going to, that way of writing will gain you great marks in your exam, and that way of writing is really what you should be modeling your writing as a legal practitioner after anyway. So use those case summaries. There are always case analysis and case summaries on Lexis or on Westlaw for each case, so use them. There are articles available, there are journals on there as well, so use those resources to the max. Get used to using them from the beginning instead of later, because that way you are able to kind of just maneuver the website and know all the tricks on their websites. So yeah, extra resources, those are them. There are some other available resources where people have let's say flowchart books. I'm trying to remember the name of the company. I can't remember it, but some people have different resources specifically for the GDL where they've produced notebooks, flowcharts for each module. If you want that, you can also go for those, but those things are only helpful when you actually know the core and the juice of the topics from class and from the required readings that you are required to do. So if you're going to be purchasing any sort of notes or flowcharts or mind maps from resources online, I feel like those will come in handy and be helpful towards the end when you're preparing for exam and you just want to see simplified information. But they are simplified. They're super simplistic so that you can just kind of ingest that information right away. And oversimplified information is not going to help you do well in the exam. So only use those when you've actually done the work, or only purchase them, only make use of them when you've actually already done the grunt of the work prior. So pro bono is basically undertaking legal work without any charge to the client. So there are a number of pro bono centers, a number of pro bono schemes across England that you can engage in, and your school will definitely be the resource for that, kind of pointing you which direction you should go. There are a lot of advice centers. There is the Blackfriars Settlement Advice Center. We have pro bono